"You're no longer needed," he said, like he was commenting on the weather and not gutting the last 11 years of my life. 6 days. That's how close I was to the finish line. 6 days away from the bonus I'd already bled for. Project completed, results delivered, contracts signed. It wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It was $68,000, my son's first semester at NYU, my mother's new hearing aids, and maybe, just maybe, a weekend where I didn't wake up at 4 a.m., grinding my teeth about expense reports. But no, Brian, my boss with the moral compass of a used car salesman and the haircut of a youth pastor, sat across from me in a glass box conference room and slid a beige folder toward me like it was a goddamn takeout menu. "Company-wide restructuring," he added, with a tone so oily I wanted to wipe my hands on the seat cushion. Restructuring. That word again. Always delivered by people who still get to keep their parking spot and a seat at the Christmas party. He tapped the paper. "Just sign here, Ellen." I looked down. A standard termination agreement, 3 weeks severance, positive reference letter, legal silence. My ears rang. My vision tunneled. But I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't ask why me because I knew why. I was the highest paid department lead who wasn't part of Brian's little inner circle of overpaid interns and LinkedIn bros, the kind of circle where your GPA mattered more than your deliverables and ping pong tournaments replaced actual leadership. And he thought I'd just nod. Be grateful for 3 weeks of hush money. Walk quietly into the LinkedIn graveyard with a carefully worded "Exploring New Opportunities" post and a stock photo of a mountain. Instead, I smiled. God help me, I smiled. Because Brian had forgotten something. Something buried deep in legal jargon, nestled in a contract no one had reviewed in nearly a decade. Clause 14B, it was my idea, back when the company was small, hopeful, and run by people who still said thank you without legal prompting. It was meant to protect top performers, me included, from unjustified termination related to performance or redundancy. If activated, it guaranteed 15% of quarterly net profit. I'd added it myself during a renegotiation in 2015. The company lawyer at the time was new and overworked. Brian hadn't even been hired yet. Nobody noticed. Until now. So yes, I signed. In silence. And when he handed me the exit checklist like I was returning a library book, I said, "Pleasure working with you, Brian." His smirk? That was the last one I'd ever see. When I walked out of the conference room, the office floor looked like it always did. Gray carpets, dying ficus trees, people pretending not to watch. Only this time they were. Karen from sales paused mid-coffee pour. Marcus from IT glanced up but looked away just as fast. Everyone knew. They just didn't want to be next. I emptied my desk in 7 minutes flat. A photo of my son from his high school graduation. My favorite pen. 3 sticky notes with handwritten reminders from a life I was apparently no longer needed in. I didn't even cry. Not there. The tears came later. Alone in my car, parked under the same flickering streetlight that had guided my exhausted walk-ins for years. I gripped the wheel and sobbed, not just from grief, but from insult. From the knowledge that they planned this. That my name was scratched off some spreadsheet like expired milk. But underneath the sadness, a different emotion stirred. Something colder, sharper. Because I wasn't beaten. Not yet. I went home, opened my laptop, and pulled out my original contract from a dusty folder labeled Important Docs. I found the clause, reread it 3 times, and laughed the kind of laugh that sounds more like a cough or a threat. It was still there. Still signed. Still valid. They owed me more than a bonus now. They owed me millions. And if Brian thought I was just going to go quietly, well, he really should have read the fine print. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was panicking. Those days were behind me. No, I was wired in a different way. Like I'd been dunked in ice water and handed a blueprint for revenge. I sat at my kitchen table, robe half-tied, a cup of chamomile going cold beside me, as I highlighted every clause, every sentence in that dusty contract that was about to become my golden ticket. Clause 14B was clear, crystal even. In the event of unjust termination not supported by formal documentation of underperformance or redundancy, the employee is entitled to 15% of the company's quarterly net profit. No fine print, no loopholes. I checked, cross-checked, even ran it through a contract analysis app just to be sure. They hadn't just fired me unjustly. They hadn't given any reason. No written warnings, no PIPs, just a beige folder and Brian's smug face. At 3:22 a.m., I called a name I hadn't said out loud in over a year. Jeremy Quinn. Jeremy was my former employment lawyer. He helped me negotiate this exact contract almost a decade ago when the company was still a lean startup with a CEO who used to hand out holiday cards and remember your kid's name. Jeremy was expensive, but he was sharp. The kind of lawyer who wrote emails like they were war plans. I sent a text. Need to review Clause 14B. You were right to insist on it. He replied 3 minutes later. Still have the file. You're waking up my inner predator. Coffee tomorrow? I stared at his response, and for the first time since the firing, I smiled like I meant it. Jeremy met me at a downtown cafe near his firm's office. The kind of place where everyone wore Patagonia fleeces and talked about real estate over 6 oat milk lattes. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes were just as sharp. And when I handed him the contract, he didn't even blink. "Oh," he said, flipping to the mark section. "They're screwed." I raised an eyebrow. "Don't get me wrong," he added. "They'll fight this. Corporate always does. But unless they've got documented cause, we have them dead to rights. Any chance they gave you a written explanation for the firing?" "Not a word," I said. "Just a vague, you're no longer needed, and that I was being let go due to restructuring. No warning, no poor reviews, just pink slip theater." Jeremy nodded, tapping his pen against the table. "Then we hit them fast and quiet. No noise, no bluff. We go full legal within the week. You didn't sign away your rights in that severance document, right?" I shook my head. It didn't mention the clause. I think Brian forgot it existed. "Perfect," Jeremy said, eyes gleaming. "We'll open with a formal demand letter. Certified. From a partner, not an associate. Makes it feel nuclear. We reference Clause 14B and attach a clean scan of the signed contract. Then we sit back and wait for the panic." "What if they try to make it look like they fired me for cause?" I asked. "Fake documents, backdated warnings." Jeremy smirked. "Then we subpoena internal records, audit document creation dates, pull metadata from their SharePoint or Outlook systems. If they try to forge anything, we'll catch them. And if they don't try, even better. They'll want to settle. Fast." I nodded slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This was real. And I wasn't alone in it. Jeremy leaned back. "You know what pisses me off the most about this?" I raised an eyebrow. "They didn't even do it with dignity. They didn't treat you like a human being. Just a number, a cost line. That makes this personal." It was personal. For me, for my son, for every late night I'd spent running numbers while Brian took credit for my work in those all-hands meetings. I left the cafe feeling like something had shifted, like the ground under me had finally stopped moving. But I also knew I couldn't win this alone. I needed someone still inside the company. Someone who knew the numbers. Someone who had access to quarterly reports, bonus pools, and the executive conversations that never made it into email threads. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts I hadn't touched in months. Past vendors, old interns, and finally, Erica Bloom, senior accountant. Smart, loyal, and definitely still pissed about being passed over for promotion 3 years in a row while Brian hired his buddy's cousin with a finance degree and a TikTok addiction. I typed, "Hey, can we talk? Something important and confidential." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. "Yes, meet me tonight, but not near the office." That's when I knew. She already had something to say. and I was finally ready to listen. We met at a strip mall sushi place with flickering signage and a host who didn't look up once as we walked in. Erica was already seated in a back booth, hunched over her miso soup like it had offended her. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The kind that settles in your bones after too many years of being overlooked, talked over, and politely ignored. She looked up when I slid in across from her. "No small talk," she said. "You texted me something about Brian and bonuses. Go, I appreciated that." No pretense. So I told her everything. The firing, the clause, Jeremy's plan, the demand letter, the eerie silence from Brian after I signed the paperwork without protest. When I mentioned Clause 14B, her eyes lit up like someone had just flipped a breaker inside her skull. "I knew there was something," she whispered. "They've been pushing us to finalize Q1 bonus calculations early. Like, really early. I mean, end of month early. And the only time they do that is when they're trying to lock something in before it changes." I leaned in. "Before what changes?" "Before someone sues, or leaks, or, you know, throws a wrench in the machine." She took a long sip of her water. Then she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a manila envelope, plain and unassuming. "I printed a few things," she said. Inside were 3 spreadsheets. Clean formatting. No scribbles. Numbers laid out like confessionals. One showed projected Q1 profits. Another, the bonus pool allocation for the executive team. The third, my favorite, was a payout forecast. Missing one line item. Mine. "Your name vanished last week," Erica said, voice low. "Just gone. Like you never existed. No notes, no revision tracking. Brian didn't even tell accounting you were being let go. He just emailed a new version of the sheet with your line missing and said, 'This one is final. Use this.'" I stared at the page. Under the column for strategic operations, where my bonus used to sit, was just a dash. "It's like they're laundering the money," she said, quietly reabsorbing it into the bonus pool. "I don't know how much you were due, but that amount, 68,000? It didn't vanish. It got reallocated. My guess? Split between Brian and 2 of the VPs. I didn't speak right away. My chest felt tight. Not angry. Not yet. Just heavy. "They didn't just fire me," I said. "They repackaged my work as someone else's bonus." Erica nodded. "Welcome to the machine." I swallowed hard. "How much is 15% of the Q1 profit projection?" She flipped to the second spreadsheet and tapped the cell with her finger. $2.6 million, she said flatly. I blinked. "That's their projected profit?" "After expenses, yes." I did the math in my head, then again just to be sure. 15% equals $390,000. That's what they owed me. Not $68,000, not hush money severance. Almost $400,000. Jeremy had been right. They were going to fight. But now I had more than a contract. I had evidence of intent. "Will you back me up?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. Not long, just enough for realism. "I'll help, carefully," she said. "But I need you to promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That if this goes public and I lose my job, you'll do everything you can to burn them down so hard no one else ever works under Brian again." I held out my hand. "Deal." She shook it. Later that night, I emailed Jeremy everything. The spreadsheets, the adjusted documents, a written statement from Erica, marked confidential, describing how the payout allocation changed. His reply came at 2:08 a.m. "This isn't just a bonus grab anymore. This is documented financial manipulation, misrepresentation to internal departments, maybe even fraud. We're moving to phase 2. Phase 2 meant escalation. A formal demand letter delivered not just to HR, but directly to the board. Jeremy drafted it the next morning. It was cold, precise, full of legal landmines. Per Clause 14B of Ms. Ellen Brooks' employment contract, and in light of newly acquired internal financial records indicating misallocation of projected bonus payouts, we are formally requesting a payment of 15% of net Q1 profit. We reserve the right to pursue this in court if no resolution is reached within 7 business days. 7 days. That's all they'd have. Jeremy sent the letter by courier and email. Then we waited. But Brian didn't. He responded the next day with a carefully worded email and 2 attached PDFs. One, a performance warning dated 2 months ago. Another, a record of disciplinary action with my digital signature. I stared at the screen in silence. Jeremy, I said into the phone, I never saw these documents in my life, and that's not my signature. There was a pause. Then, well, he said calmly, now they've made a mistake. The PDFs sat open on my screen side by side. One was a formal performance warning, supposedly issued in February, citing vague nonsense like lack of leadership alignment and failure to demonstrate cross-functional synergy. The other was worse, a disciplinary notice for insubordination, dated just 3 weeks before I was let go. And at the bottom, a signature that was supposed to be mine. It wasn't. They used my full name, Ellen Marie Brooks, and typed it in a script font that barely looked human. No stroke pressure, no angle variation, just something slapped together in Microsoft Word like an afterthought. I stared at it for a long time, then called Jeremy. They forged my signature, I said, my voice flat. They created fake documents to justify the firing. There was a pause, and then I heard the faint rustle of him standing up. They panicked, he said. This is amateur, sloppy, and stupid. Did you ever sign anything electronically? Never for disciplinary actions. Never for anything HR-related. We were required to sign those in person, remember? With a witness from HR present. Perfect, he said. We request the metadata from the originals. Let's find out when they were actually created, and on whose computer. He was already drafting the subpoena request as we spoke. I barely slept that night. Not from fear. Those days were behind me, but from something deeper. Resolve. This wasn't just about a bonus anymore. It wasn't even about the $390,000 I was legally owed. This had turned into something much bigger. They tried to erase me. And when they couldn't, they tried to frame me. That kind of arrogance doesn't just go away on its own. It needs to be dragged into the light. 2 days later, Jeremy called. I answered on the first ring. We got the metadata, he said. Their legal team thought sending PDFs would slow us down, but our request went straight to IAT compliance. Someone over there clearly still has a soul. And? Both documents were created on Brian's laptop, March 25th, at 8:42 p.m. That's 5 days after they fired you. I blinked. So, not only forged, but created after your termination, which means they're not just unethical. They're falsifying records post-employment, which, depending on jurisdiction, could border on criminal. I could almost hear him smile through the phone. It's rare we get a clean shot like this, Ellen. They handed us a gift. At Jeremy's suggestion, we didn't confront them directly. Instead, he filed a quiet complaint with the company's external legal auditor. It's the kind of internal watchdog most execs forget about, until it bites them. Then he made one more call. To a journalist. Not just any journalist. Sarah Klein, a respected business reporter for a major online outlet. The kind of person who double-checks every source and doesn't flinch when threatened with a cease and desist. Jeremy sent her a teaser. Redacted versions of the forged documents, the contract clause, and a timeline of events. She called me personally within 12 hours. I'm not here to sensationalize this, she said. But if what you're alleging is true, this is a pattern. I've covered 3 similar cases in the last year. Firings right before bonus payouts, sudden restructurings with no documentation, and forged warnings to kill clauses like yours. I hesitated. I'm not looking for fame. I'm not trying to burn the place down. I get it, she said. But this isn't just about you anymore. It's about accountability. If you let me write this, anonymously, if you want, I promise I'll protect your sources and stay fact-checked down to the ink. After a long pause, I said yes. She asked for one quote. I gave her this. When people in power are allowed to rewrite history with a few keystrokes, everyone loses. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. The article went live 3 days later. The title was brutal in its precision. Fired before the bonus, inside a corporate culture of quiet erasure. It didn't name the company. It didn't name Brian. But it didn't have to. The breadcrumbs were clear. And in the age of LinkedIn, the readers did the rest. By the end of the day, the post had over 18,000 shares, hundreds of comments, and one very panicked email from the company's general counsel asking if we could resolve this quickly. Jeremy told them we were still reviewing options. We're not done yet, he said to me. Neither was I. Because the next morning, Erica texted me something that made my stomach flip. They're shredding files. I just saw Brian take 2 binders marked executive compensation into the records room. Door was locked. Then he told the intern to take an early lunch. They were trying to erase the evidence. But it was already too late. We had what we needed. And now, we had an audience. When your enemies stop pretending, that's when the game changes. The morning after Sarah Klein's article dropped, I woke to 5 missed calls from unknown numbers and 1 voicemail from someone I hadn't heard from in almost a year. Robert Chang, one of the company's board members. Back when I was still useful to them, he'd once told me I was the quiet engine that keeps the train moving. Now I was a liability. The voicemail was short. Ellen, I think it's in everyone's interest we speak directly. Please contact my assistant. We'd like to arrange a meeting. Discreetly. I forwarded the message to Jeremy. He didn't respond right away. Then, finally, let them come to us. In writing, an hour later, an email arrived from the company's outside counsel. Not the in-house team, but a big white shoe firm from downtown. Polite, vague, nervous. They requested a closed-door meeting between myself, my legal representation, and select members of senior leadership to reach a mutually beneficial resolution. Jeremy and I sat down later that day to prepare. The man showed up with 4 color-coded folders, a tablet full of timestamps, and a calm that made me feel dangerous. He looked across the table at me. We're not just negotiating a payout, Ellen. We're negotiating your terms, your dignity, your message. I'm not walking away with the check in silence, I said. He nodded. Good. Because the number I have in mind isn't based on your original bonus. It's based on everything they tried to bury. He opened the spreadsheet. Projected Q1 profit, $2.6 million. 15% per clause. 14B equals $390,000. Plus penalties, legal fees, reputational damages. Jeremy's opening number, $625,000. I didn't breathe for a second. They're going to flinch, I said quietly. They're going to sweat, he corrected. Then they're going to pay. The meeting was set for Friday at 10:30 a.m. in a sterile conference room on the 19th floor of a midtown legal office. The windows were too clean, the table too polished. Everything reeked of corporate damage control. Brian was already seated when we walked in. No tie, pale, hair freshly cut, probably to look professional for the board. He didn't look at me, just fiddled with a Mont Blanc pen and pretended to read from a blank legal pad. To his right was Marissa Lowell, head of HR. To his left, the company's general counsel, a man named Stewart, who looked like he chewed through non-disclosure agreements for breakfast. Jeremy and I sat across from them like we'd been planning this for months, which, in a way, we had. After brief introductions, Stewart cleared his throat. Ms. Brooks, our client is interested in resolving this situation without further escalation. We understand there may have been some confusion regarding your departure. I said nothing. Jeremy smiled like a shark in a pond. Let's be clear. Your client fired Ms. Brooks without cause, then submitted forged documents, then attempted to reallocate her bonus without disclosure. That's not confusion. That's calculated deception. Stewart's jaw twitched. We believe there's room to negotiate. Brian finally looked up. She was difficult, he said, voice tight. Always questioning my direction, resistant to change. Her performance? Jeremy held up a hand. We're not here to debate adjectives. We're here because you violated a legal contract. And now we're going to fix that. He slid a single-page document across the table. Settlement amount, $625,000 NDA terms. Limited. No disclosure of amount, but right to share experience anonymously. Admission of fault. None required non-retaliation clause. Included. Marissa exhaled like someone had punched her in the stomach. Brian's face turned bright red. Stewart asked for a private moment. We stepped out. In the hallway, Jeremy checked his watch. They'll counter, he said. But they know they're out of moves. If this goes to court, the forged docs alone could tank them. And if Sarah writes a follow-up with that metadata... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. 10 minutes later, we were called back in. Stewart's tone was clipped. Our client will agree to the financial terms, provided the NDA is slightly adjusted to limit third-party media discussions. Jeremy didn't even blink. Denied. The article already ran. Ellen retains the right to clarify or correct public record should it be necessary. More silence. Then a reluctant nod. It was done. They printed the agreement on the spot. I signed. Brian stared at me like he was waiting for me to gloat. I didn't. I just stood, gathered my things, and said, "You should have read the fine print." Jeremy and I walked out of that building with the signed agreement in hand and one last, quiet victory still ahead. Because the check hadn't hit my account yet. But something else had. Control. The wire hit my account on a Tuesday morning at 9:03 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table, same spot where I'd read through the contract weeks earlier, same cold mug of tea, same crack in the ceiling I still hadn't fixed. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt finished. $625,000. Clean. Legal. Untouchable. I stared at the number for a long time, long enough that my banking app signed me out. When I logged back in just to make sure it was real, it still made my chest ache. Not because of the money, though, yes, that changed everything. But because I finally had something corporate never gives. Closure. Not the fake kind. Not a signed card or a half-hearted farewell email. The real kind. The kind you fight for. The kind you earn. I used the money the way you might expect. Paid off the mortgage, cleared my credit card debt. Set aside tuition for my son. He cried when I told him he wouldn't have to take out loans for sophomore year. Then I transferred $20,000 to Erica with a note that just said, "Thank you for not looking away." She called me 3 minutes later, sobbing. Said it was too much. Said she hadn't done it for the money. I told her I knew that. Which is why she deserved it. I also paid Jeremy's fee in full, then sent him a bottle of 25-year scotch with a note that read, "For the next client who's underestimated." 3 weeks passed. The company never released a statement. Never admitted wrongdoing. That wasn't surprising. But Brian? He quietly resigned on a Friday afternoon. No announcement, no party, no explanation. Just an empty office and a deactivated email. I heard later that he tried to frame it as pursuing new opportunities. The irony nearly choked me. Rumors swirled for a while. Something about irregularities, audits, outside legal reviews. Erica said HR was interviewing staff about internal policy violations, and the board had hired a third-party firm to assess ethical leadership standards. In plain English, they were cleaning house. Quietly. Quiet like a cover-up. I thought that would be the end of it. Until one day I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from a woman named Carla, a senior analyst at another tech firm. She wrote, "Hi, Ellen. I read the anonymous quote in that article. and I think I know who you are. Just wanted to say thank you. I was let go from my last job under similar circumstances and thought I was crazy. Your story reminded me that I'm not. There were more messages after that. Dozens. From strangers, from women, from older employees, from people who had also been erased, dismissed, paper-trailed into silence. They didn't want revenge. They wanted to be seen. So I wrote a post. Not a name drop. Not a takedown. Just a story. About the quiet people who build companies. About the contracts no one reads until they matter. About what it means to walk away with your spine intact. It ended like this. Some bridges deserve to burn. Some doors are better closed. But your name? That's not negotiable. Protect it. Fight for it. Keep receipts. The post didn't go viral. Not right away. But it resonated. Because it was real. And sometimes real is louder than dramatic. People always think the best revenge is fire and fury. But honestly, the best revenge is survival. The best revenge is sitting on your back porch, 3 months later, with your mother in one chair and your son in another, sipping lemonade while the spring breeze runs through the trees. It's hearing your son say, "Mom, I'm proud of you." It's knowing you didn't burn your life down. You rebuilt it, brick by brick, clause by clause. And you didn't become like them. You stayed you. One day, months later, I passed that old office building. I was walking downtown after lunch with a former colleague. I paused across the street, looked up at the 12th floor window that used to be mine. It was dark, empty. Someone had removed the nameplate on the glass door. I didn't feel angry or sad. I just felt free. I turned to my friend and said, "Let's keep walking." Because the story was over. And the next one? I'd write it on my terms. After 15 years at Ridgeway Events and Media, I sat in the office I had practically built from scratch, surrounded by gear I'd purchased with my own money, ideas I'd nurtured into full-blown systems, and memories of deadlines that nearly broke me. The laminated sign above my desk read, "Problem Solver in Chief." A joke from my team. Only now, the joke was on me. "Lisa," my boss Greg said, not meeting my eyes. "Due to restructuring, we're downsizing your position." I blinked once. The air conditioning hummed in the silence between us. He continued, "We're bringing in a new hire, fresh out of university. She'll be trained to handle media, event logistics, and, well, all the things you used to handle." This wasn't just a layoff. This was a replacement. A clean slate, a budget reset, a slap in the face after 15 years of doing 5 jobs for the price of one. "I understand," I said calmly. Because I did. Not the logic, but the message. "You're too old, too expensive, too hard to control." Greg exhaled like he was relieved I wasn't making a scene. "You'll need to clear your office by Friday," he added, "and take everything that's yours. You won't be coming back." I smiled slightly. "Of course, I'll take everything that's mine." 15 years ago, I was hired as a media designer. Just that, one role. But when the marketing manager quit, I stepped up. When the events lead had a breakdown during a 500-person conference, I took over. When the AV supplier bailed last minute, I ran to my car, grabbed my own microphones, cables, lights, and got the job done. The company never bothered replacing missing gear, so I kept bringing mine in. Piece by piece, year by year. Camera rigs, light kits, spare cables, soundboards. And every piece had my name written on it, just in case. They always laughed at that detail. That detail would soon become everything. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to notice, was that their entire AV infrastructure, their live streaming setup, their mobile event unit, was mine. Not metaphorically, literally mine. By Thursday morning, I arrived early, before Greg, before the new girl, before HR. and I started packing. The first few boxes were easy, labeled hard cases filled with mics, stands, and mixing decks. Then came the modular lights, wireless cams, HDMI extenders. I had every receipt saved in a neatly labeled folder on Google Drive. Then came the crown jewel, the control booth. Greg found me as I was unlocking the door with my own key. You can't take that stuff, he stammered. Oh? Why not? It's essential to our event setup. I raised an eyebrow. Yes, it is. That's why I brought it in. Want to see the receipts? He hesitated, then gestured vaguely behind him. Well, maybe just leave the booth gear, at least until we train the new girl. I smiled sweetly. You said I wouldn't be coming back, Greg. I'm just doing exactly what you told me to do. I loaded up my Ford Explorer with help from Tara, one of the only coworkers who still had a soul. With every box we loaded, his face looked more and more like bad lighting at a gala, she whispered. By noon, half the storage closet was empty. Every piece of gear labeled LJ was mine. I knew because I'd labeled it. All those years of staying late to organize, repair, replace, now they were stacked neatly in cardboard boxes. By 2 p.m., the live stream equipment was gone. By 3:30, the backup servers I'd brought in for remote events, yep, gone too. Greg was pacing the hallway now, phone in hand, red-faced, whispering into his sleeve. They thought I was disposable. But they never once asked, what if everything we rely on leaves with her? When I finally drove off, my SUV sagging under the weight of a company's forgotten foundation, Greg stood at the curb, silent, confused. But it was Friday I left, and Monday would be fascinating. Because on Monday, Ridgeway Events had a high-profile event with over 300 guests, a live broadcast, and multiple feeds across 3 cities. And they no longer had the gear, or the woman who knew how to run it. Friday evening, I drove home with my car packed tighter than a moving truck. Every bump in the road made the lighting kits rattle, the mic stands shift. I glanced in the rearview mirror at the gear that had powered dozens of conferences, charity galas, and corporate launches. And I remembered something my dad once told me. Never loan out what you're not willing to lose. That advice had guided every decision I made in the last decade, including the one to put my name on every single item I ever brought into Ridgeway Events. Greg had laughed at the time. Paranoid much? He joked. Now? I imagined him staring at the empty AV booth, realizing just how much of his infrastructure had never belonged to him at all. By the time I got home, my driveway looked like a film crew had moved in. My neighbor, Mike, leaned on the fence with a beer in hand. Big shoot this weekend? He asked. Not exactly, I said, exhaling as I opened the trunk. More like the end of an era. He offered to help carry things in. As we unloaded the boxes into my garage, I told him the short version, about how I'd been let go, how they brought in someone cheaper, how they told me to take everything that was mine, and how I had. He let out a low whistle. So what are they going to do without all this? That's their problem now. Saturday morning, I opened my laptop and scrolled through the event calendar on Ridgeway's public website. Monday, the big one, the Northcrest Regional Education Conference. 3 cities, remote panels, keynote from the state superintendent, live streamed to over 2,000 viewers, and every year I was the one who made it happen. I knew their playbook inside and out, the gear required, the setup time, the backup plans, the cables no one else remembered to pack. And I knew that without me, or my equipment, they were in serious trouble. But I wasn't smiling. Not really. Because this wasn't just some petty revenge fantasy. It was personal. 15 years of giving everything. Missing birthdays, anniversaries, staying up until 2 a.m. to fix a crashed feed because there's no one else who knows how. I trained interns, built workflows, prevented disasters before they happened. And in the end, I wasn't even worth a real explanation. Just a canned line about downsizing and a 20-something with a shiny degree and no real experience waiting to take over my life's work. Sunday afternoon, I got a message from Tara. Tara, Hey, just a heads up. Greg's been calling people in a panic. Something about missing AV inventory and a broken livestream plan. I responded with a simple thumbs up emoji. 30 minutes later, she called. Lisa, I know you're done, but I need to tell you something. They had the intern try to set up tomorrow's event. She didn't even know what a DI box was. Greg actually asked if we could just zoom it in with laptops. I nearly walked out. I closed my eyes. It was worse than I thought. And the venue? I asked. New location this year. No built-in AV. They were counting on your kits. The wireless mics, the camera rig, the switcher. All gone. She paused. He asked if I could maybe reach out to you. Just for a little help. I didn't answer right away. After a long silence, I said, I wish I could help. But I'm just doing exactly what he told me. I took what was mine and left. I don't work there anymore. She sighed. Didn't think you would. Just figured you should know what kind of chaos is coming. As the sun set, I walked out to my garage and flipped on the lights. Dozens of items sat neatly stacked and labeled. I ran my fingers over the lid of the road case that held the wireless transmitters, over the charger dock for the LED uplights, over the laminated emergency cable chart I made during a 3-day power outage. They hadn't just fired me. They'd amputated their only working limb and handed the scalpel to someone who didn't know which side was sharp. And now? Now they were about to try and walk on their own. Let's see how that goes. Monday was less than 12 hours away. I made tea, opened a new document on my laptop, and started writing. Not a resignation letter, not a rant. Something better, a pitch. Because after 15 years of being the invisible engine behind other people's success, I finally had a shot at building something of my own. And if Ridgeway Events wanted to burn down what we built together, I had every intention of rising from the ashes. I was halfway through my first sip of tea when the first call came in. Anonymous number. I didn't answer. Then a second. This time from Ridgeway's front desk. Still no. By 8 a.m., I had 3 missed calls, 1 voicemail, and a text from Tara that simply read, They're falling apart. I've never seen Greg like this. I believed her, because I knew exactly what they were walking into. The Northcrest Regional Education Conference was Ridgeway's biggest spring event. It spanned 3 cities, each with its own tech setup, and required seamless live streaming, interactive Q&As, backup feeds, and content switching. I'd built every part of that process from the ground up, from color-coded cable routing to customized overlay graphics. And all of it? Gone. Still sitting, labeled and dust-free in my garage. At 8:32 a.m., I received a panicked voicemail from Greg. His voice was clipped and fast, like he'd already had too much coffee. Or not enough sleep. Lisa, hi, this is Greg. Look, I think there may have been some miscommunication about what equipment belonged to the company. We really need you to clarify a few things. Urgently. This event is going sideways. Please call me back ASAP. I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop and continued typing. The pitch deck was coming along nicely. A consulting and technical support brand for nonprofits and education conferences. Simple, clean branding, flat rates, transparent services. My tagline was almost too perfect. You don't need an agency. You need someone who gives a damn. At 9 a.m., Tara texted again. They're trying to run everything through someone's personal iPad. Sound keeps cutting out. Audience is fidgeting. One of the panelists just said, Can anyone hear me? Live on stream. They're asking for your setup diagrams. I told them I didn't have copies. I do, but I'm not giving them away for free. I smirked. Tara was loyal to a fault. And now they were finally realizing who their real backbone had been. By 10:15 a.m., my inbox lit up again. This time, it was from Alyssa, Ridgeway's marketing lead. Hi, Lisa. I hope you're doing well. Greg asked me to reach out and see if there's any chance you'd be available for a quick consult today. He's willing to compensate you for your time. Please let me know if there's any way you can help. I stared at the email for a moment. Consult. That was the word. Not help, not save us, just consult, which legally meant billable hours, progress. But I didn't reply. Not yet. At 11 a.m., I finally allowed myself a moment to relax. Tea gone cold, emails still piling up. I walked out to the garage and opened one of the hard cases, taking inventory. Everything was still pristine, ready to deploy, ready to earn me money instead of building someone else's empire. By noon, Ridgeway's livestream had been pulled offline. I didn't need Tara to tell me. Social media was already catching wind. A few conference attendees had tweeted about the failure. Biggest education event in the region can't keep their feed live for more than 30 seconds. Embarrassing. They fired the person who used to run this. That's what I heard. Wild. At 12:46 p.m., Greg called again. This time I answered. Lisa. Oh, thank God. Look, this whole thing has gotten out of hand. I didn't say anything. I admit it. He continued. I didn't realize how much of the AV stuff was actually yours. I should have asked more questions. Silence. We need help. Just a few hours. I'll pay you personally if I have to. I finally spoke. I appreciate the offer, Greg, but I don't do last-minute emergency calls for people who told me I was replaceable. He stammered. I never said, you didn't need to. You said downsizing. You said, take everything that's yours. I did. Now you're seeing what I left behind. Silence again. Lisa, please. I sighed. I'm happy to talk business. Not favors. Business, consulting, contracts, rates, the kind of professional respect I never got when I worked for you. Okay. Can you send over your terms? I already did. What? Check your inbox. Because 15 minutes earlier, while he was busy begging, I had sent a branded quote with an emergency same-day consulting rate. 4 times my old hourly salary. And he had exactly 2 hours to accept before I turned off my phone. By 1 p.m., he'd signed. By 2 p.m., I was logged into their temporary stream remotely, stabilizing it with the same software I used for years, and walking Tara through a patched-together version of my original event workflow. And by 4 p.m., my invoice had been paid in full. No apologies, no recognition, just a confirmation email, and a note at the bottom. Please keep your availability open for future events. I closed my laptop. If they wanted me, they'd pay my rate. Not because I was bitter, but because knowing your value is only half the battle. The other half is making sure no one gets it for free. By Tuesday morning, I'd already had 3 inquiries, not from Ridgeway, from their competitors. One was a mid-sized conference group who had followed the Northcrest livestream and noticed something odd. That the stream quality had improved mid-event, despite obvious tech hiccups earlier in the day. The organizer called it a mystery save. The second was a nonprofit in the education sector. They'd been at the event. Their director pulled me aside during the awkward lunch break and said, I don't know what happened this morning, but someone fixed it. Was that you? I simply nodded. You freelance? He asked. I do now. I didn't sleep much that week. Not because I was stressed, not anymore, but because something inside me had clicked. Something I hadn't felt in years. Momentum. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was building. Every document I created, every client conversation, every minute spent updating my old logo. It felt like I was finally pouring all those invisible hours into something that was mine. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about how it all started. 15 years, no formal title changes, no bonuses for the overnight fixes, no official acknowledgement when I prevented a major security breach during an international live event. I was always just the media designer, even when I was also the AV lead, the backup coordinator, the vendor liaison, and the person who climbed the scaffolding at 6 a.m. to tape down a cable no one else noticed. And Greg? He was already shopping for his next intern. By Thursday, Ridgeway had another problem. They were scheduled to host a product launch for one of their major clients, a long-term contract that had been Lisa-dependent from the beginning. The client, a large tech firm, insisted on a full mock run of the event 48 hours ahead of time. It was standard. What wasn't standard was that the moment the client arrived at the venue, they realized something was off. No signal flow, no directional monitors, no backup rig, and no Lisa. Tara called me from the back loading dock, whispering. They're trying to fake their way through this setup. The client's head of communications is furious. He literally said, "Where's the woman who usually runs this? We don't want kids with clipboards. We want the expert." "Let me guess," I said. "They're stalling." Hard. Greg's sweating through his blazer. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered him sitting across from me just 1 week ago, arms folded, offering a 1-paragraph severance letter and the words, "Take everything that's yours." Now he was learning what that really meant. That evening, I got an email. Not from Ridgeway, but directly from the tech firm's comms director. "Hi, Lisa. I understand you're no longer with Ridgeway Events. A shame, considering every product launch we've done with them was a result of your preparation. Are you available for independent consultation?" That one email changed everything. Within 48 hours, I had signed my first official client under my new business name, LJ Event Systems. And the scope? Full technical consulting for all U.S. product launches for the next 12 months. Custom workflows. Equipment recommendations. Live support. Optional. My name on the contract. Not hidden in the background. Not borrowed. Mine. By the following Monday, Ridgeway's product launch had been downgraded to a static presentation. No live stream. No interactive panel. Just a slideshow and a podium mic that kept cutting out. The tech firm quietly canceled their multi-year event contract later that week. Tara forwarded me the internal memo. Greg blamed resourcing complications and unforeseen staffing transitions. He never once said my name, but I didn't need him to. My name was already appearing in other inboxes, recommended by that same tech firm to 3 of their partner companies, all asking the same thing. "Are you available?" "We're looking for someone reliable. We heard what you did." That Friday, a package arrived on my doorstep. Inside was a small glass plaque. It wasn't flashy. Just a single line of engraving. "In recognition of everything you held together. Tara." I stood there for a long time, plaque in hand, blinking back tears. Not because I needed validation, but because after so many years of being unseen, it felt like someone had finally noticed. I sent Tara a thank you message. She didn't reply right away. Later, I'd find out she was prepping for her final exit interview. She'd had enough, too. Greg had underestimated the cost of losing me. What he didn't realize yet was that the fallout was just beginning. You can fire the person, but you can't fire the foundation they built out from under you and expect the building to stay standing. By the 3rd week, Ridgeway had lost 2 more clients. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no scandal or leaked memo, just quiet cancellations one after another. Events postponed indefinitely. Budgets reevaluated. Decision-makers ghosting Greg's follow-up emails. I wasn't celebrating. At least not in the gloating, champagne-popping way you might expect. Because while Ridgeway was unraveling, I was drowning in opportunity. Word had gotten around. That woman who saved the Northcrest conference? The one who built Ridgeway's entire tech infrastructure on her own dime and walked away with it? Yeah, her. Suddenly, I wasn't just getting interest from clients. I was getting approached by vendors, equipment suppliers, venue managers, people I'd worked alongside for over a decade who finally knew my name. "Lisa, if you ever need lighting rigs for your own shows, we'll cut you a great deal. Hey, we've got some beta gear we'd love for you to test, if you're interested. We're short-staffed for the Education Futures Summit. Any chance you'd consult?" The irony wasn't lost on me. At Ridgeway, I was the person people emailed after they'd talked to everyone else. Now, I was the first name on the list. Tara officially left Ridgeway that Wednesday. She didn't make a scene. No farewell speech, just a quiet lunch with 2 other colleagues who had already handed in their notice. They offered me a loyalty bonus to stay. she told me on the phone that evening, her voice dry with sarcasm. Can you believe that? I laughed. Did you take it? Nope. I accepted a job with one of the nonprofit clients you worked with last year. They offered me a better salary, better hours, and they actually asked me what I wanted out of the role. I was proud of her. Not just for leaving, but for finally choosing herself. That was the real revenge, wasn't it? Not watching a company fail, but watching good people finally recognize their worth and walk out on their own terms. On Friday afternoon, I got a call I didn't expect. It was from Naomi Carter, the CFO of Ridgeway's parent company. I'd only met her once at a corporate holiday party where she introduced herself politely, then spent the next 20 minutes talking to Greg about quarterly performance indicators while I poured wine for the sponsors. Lisa, good to speak with you, she said coolly. Likewise, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I wanted to follow up regarding the Northcrest recovery and the product launch situation. I waited. She continued, We've reviewed the recent event outcomes, client losses, and technical issues. It's clear that Ridgeway underestimated your role in the infrastructure. That's on us. There was a long pause. I'd like to offer you a formal consulting retainer, she said, directly through corporate, not Ridgeway. We'd like your support on 3 upcoming projects. Your experience is difficult to replace. It was almost an apology. Almost. But more importantly, it was recognition from the top, the kind that actually meant something. I told her I'd consider it, then emailed her a quote the next morning. My rate, my terms, no discounts, no favors. She agreed within the hour. Meanwhile, Greg wasn't doing so well. Tara had stayed connected to a few people still inside Ridgeway. Word spread that senior leadership had started auditing budgets, client feedback, and project timelines. Apparently, someone had finally asked the right question. How did we let her go without knowing what she was responsible for? According to Tara, Greg's answer had been, we thought she was just operations. Just operations. The person who built the media systems from scratch. The person who trained every intern, wrote the setup guides, managed every major broadcast Ridgeway had ever delivered. It was laughable. But it was also typical. Companies love to use words like team and family when things are going well. But the moment money gets tight, the first heads on the chopping block are the ones who say yes too often and make miracles look routine. By the end of that month, Ridgeway lost its largest annual client, a healthcare group that had contracted them for 10 years straight. I knew the organizer. She sent me a LinkedIn message. They said you weren't with the company anymore. I told them, no Lisa, no contract. Just wanted you to know. That was the moment it truly hit me. I hadn't just been a part of Ridgeway. I had been Ridgeway for a long time. They just never bothered to see it, until it was too late. And yet, I didn't feel rage, or even triumph, just clarity. Because when you spend years doing the work of 5 people, constantly proving your value, constantly being told you're lucky to be here, you start to believe it's true. That being needed is the same as being respected. But they're not the same. And now that I had finally drawn that line, I wasn't going back. Not for Ridgeway. Not for anyone. 3 months after I walked out of Ridgeway events, I stood backstage at the Lakeside Civic Auditorium, clipboard in hand, headset snug against my ear, watching a room of 800 people take their seats for the Education Futures Gala. My show. Not Ridgeway's. Not Greg's. Mine. LJ Event Systems had landed its 5th contract in just 8 weeks. Our calendar was booked through the fall. I had hired 2 part-time AV techs and a virtual assistant. I wasn't just busy. I was finally in control. Camera 2, stand by, I said into the mic. We're live in 3, 2. The live stream began without a hitch. Smooth, polished, precise. The way it always was. Only now the credit wasn't going to someone else. Later that night, as the applause faded and the audience filed out, I checked my email for any post-event feedback. Among the client messages and vendor updates was one that made me freeze. Subject: Ridgeway request. It was from Naomi Carter again. Lisa, I hope this message finds you well. Ridgeway Events has undergone a series of internal changes. Greg Reynolds has officially resigned. We've also parted ways with two other senior staff members. We are reevaluating the company's structure and would like to extend an offer for you to return, not to your old role, but to lead a new division focused on event technology strategy and consulting. You would report directly to me. I read the message twice, then a third time. They weren't just asking me back. They were offering me leadership, authority, autonomy, a chance to rebuild the house they had once tossed me out of. But I'd already built something better. I clicked reply and typed slowly, carefully. Hi, Naomi. Thank you for the update and the generous offer. I'm proud of the work I did at Ridgeway, but I've since moved on to pursue my own path. LJ Event Systems is now fully operational, and I'm focused on growing something that reflects my values: accountability, respect, and ownership. I do wish Ridgeway the best during this transition. Let me know if you'd like to discuss licensing access to any of our technical frameworks. Happy to talk business. Just not employment. Warmly, Lisa Jennings, founder, LJ Event Systems. I hovered over send for a moment, then clicked. It didn't feel spiteful. It felt final. A week later, I was invited to speak on a panel for women in media tech. The topic? What happens when they replace you and you replace yourself with something better? I shared the full story. The silent burnout. The downsizing. The moment I was told to take everything that's yours. The realization that everything that made Ridgeway work had been quietly carried in and cared for by me, year after year. After the panel, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous. Early 20s, maybe a year out of college. Hi, I just wanted to say thank you. I was recently told by my boss that people like me don't last in this industry. I was thinking of quitting. But your story, she hesitated. It reminded me that I'm not crazy, that some of us really are doing everything and getting none of the credit. I smiled. You're not crazy. You're just ahead of the curve. Document everything. Put your name on your work. And don't wait until someone gives you permission to own your value. She nodded, teary-eyed. That moment alone made it all worth it. By the end of that quarter, Ridgeway had lost 4 long-term clients. Their stock among vendors and sponsors had taken a hit. Meanwhile, LJ Event Systems had signed with 2 national nonprofits and was negotiating its first licensing deal with an AV platform provider, using diagrams, documents, and systems I'd developed long ago. On nights no one at Ridgeway ever knew I stayed late to finish. Not out of obligation, but because I cared. They never understood that. They just assumed I was lucky to have a job. Now they were lucky if they could get me on the phone. As I sat at my desk one evening, sorting through proposals and onboarding forms, I looked around my new office. A converted space above a co-working studio, bright with natural light, covered in sticky notes, whiteboards, and cables coiled neatly on the shelves. Everything here was mine. And more importantly, everything here was built from scratch, not stolen or borrowed or downsized. At 56, I had finally achieved what no promotion could ever give me: agency, ownership, and respect, on my own terms. Because when Greg told me, take everything that's yours, he had no idea what that included. It wasn't just my lights and cameras. It wasn't just my workflow or expertise. It was my power. And now, I'll never hand it over for free again.